All right, everybody. So I'll make a deal with you, okay? So here's the deal. I'm going to work really hard for the next hour to give you one idea, one insight, one takeaway, something that you can walk away from and say that was worth it. Just ideally one, hopefully more. Here's your end of the bargain. Your end of the bargain is you have to have an open mind, and you have to be willing at the end of this hour, I'll leave about 10 minutes, to do what I call a lightning round. And a lightning round is where I go around and I ask you the one aha, the one insight, the one takeaway that you got from this last hour's conversation. So be thinking about one of those ahas or takeaways, because you'll get a chance to share it. I taught at Georgetown for about 7 years to graduate students, and I taught at night, and they would come at 6:30, and they all would have their laptops open. And I was always like wondering what they were doing with their laptops. So I'd walk around the outer ring, and they were on Zappos, they were checking email, they were doing all those things that you would do when you're tired and trying to sort of decompress. So I started this lightning round, which helped them stay engaged and connected, because every 15 or 20 minutes I'd ask them a lightning round contribution. So it's really a good way to keep people engaged. So that's our deal. Are we good on that? Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to spend about 15 or 20% of this hour talking about something that I think is really important. And it's a little strategic, it's a little theoretical, but I think it's going to be worth it. And then 80% is going to be nuts and bolts, hands-on things you can go back and use and apply. And one of the benefits of a session like this is you're not going to agree with a lot of it. You're not going to find a lot of it relevant, but much of it you will. And so what I'd ask you to do when you share your lightning round contribution is say, that seems like a good idea, but I can't ever imagine doing that. Or how did that ever work? Or what were you thinking when you put that plan in place? So you can challenge everything we talk about today. You don't have to agree with anything. So here's what I'd like to start off with is this one thing. I was traveling and I found this book in an airport gift shop. And the question the book asks is very simple. What's the one thing you could do such by doing that everything else in your life would be easier or unnecessary? That's like an existential question. What's the one thing that you could do in your life that would make everything either easier or unnecessary? And the title of this is What's One Thing That All of Us, I Believe, Should At Least Consider? And then I'm going to give you 5 really hands-on, chunky things that you can do. So the one thing, and I'm going to ask you to sort of live from your imagination, not your memory here, to ask you is, what is the lens through which you view your job? Okay? What's the lens through which you view it? And so it begs this question, what business are you really in? What business would you say you're in?
Face-to-face marketing.
Face-to-face marketing, great answer. What business would you say you're in?
Cargo industry.
Cargo industry, how about you? Event management. Richard? Behavior modification. Ooh, that's deep. Okay, that's deep and a little spooky, but I like it. I like it. Okay, how about you? What business are you in?
Herding engineers.
Herding engineers, okay. What's the lens through which you view the world? Like if you, professionally, like you look at the world through this lens. What's the lens that you look through the world with? What do you think? Pardon me? A microscope. Why do you say that? Yeah, you're always trying to sort of deconstruct it. That's good. Okay, so let me ask this question. How many of you think you're in the inspiration business? Raise your hand if you've even considered that. Wow. Why do you think you're in the inspiration business? Why would you say that?
Because we do scenic product, and we try to push the envelope of meetings and event spaces and make them inspirational spaces.
So this is the highest percentage of hands raised I've ever seen when I ask this question. Most people don't think of themselves in the behavioral modification business. And I'm an advertising guy by temperament and experience mainly. And you know, advertising and live face-to-face marketing is about changing hearts and minds. He said not to go near the speakers. You were right. And influencing behavior. You're trying to influence behavior. Get somebody to buy something, sell something, learn something, connect with somebody, build a relationship, get a job. All the reasons that people come to your conferences and your trade shows. So thinking about yourself in the inspiration business, I think, can be inspirational because it's a great way to look at everything you do. You have to run the show. You have to make the P&L work. You have to get the marketing, the reg, and all the mechanics in place. But when you're in looking through this lens of inspiration, I think it changes how you approach what you do. And we don't see the things the way they are. We see them the way that we are. Have you ever thought about this? We see things through the lens of our own experience, our own beliefs, our own values, our own biases, our own prejudice. Is this still working? Yep. So one of the things I'd ask you to do is think about the selective perception you have. A lot of us look through a very narrow lens because we have a job to do, and oftentimes it's hard to let that lens down, and it's oftentimes the microscope because you're sort of making sure things work. And I'd say sometimes if you step back and look through the telescope and look at other events, other conferences, and things that are working, it allows you to change your perception. Now, some of you see 3 bars, some of you see 4, and of course, we're both right. We both see the same exact image, and depending on, and I've spent a lot of time tracing and seeing how they get 4 on one side and 3 on another. So seeing things differently is really what I'm challenging you, asking you to do, and I love this Wayne Dyer quote, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. What's an example in your life of something that you looked at differently, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I never saw it that way? What's an example? Or maybe a person. Give me an example. Something you had like a hardcore belief, a bias, a prejudice, a person maybe you didn't like or get along with, and then all of a sudden they did something, you're like, whoa, I never saw you that way. Is there an example? Something that you look at and then there was a change and you started to look at it differently. Somebody.
Oh.
Yes.
I had an experience with a colleague, and my interactions had not been positive. Not necessarily negative, but not positive. And then another colleague had made a sidebar comment. Oh, thank you. And after my other colleague had made a sidebar comment, something positive about this individual and how they were trying to create change, but they just didn't know quite how to do it, I used that perspective and changed the way I looked at this other colleague and immediately went after them for contributions about change, and the whole relationship changed from there on.
That's such a great example. Think about the difficult things in your life. Relationships, bosses, vendors, suppliers, attendees. You know, when you start to look at things through the lens of their perspective, it really starts to change how you look at things. How many of you like change? Raise your hand if you like change. Okay. How many of you like to change? What's an example of a change that you made that felt good or you liked or had an impact?
I'm trying to think of what's not. Everything, I like to change everything. So my staff doesn't really appreciate me much, but...
But they're growing.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even think of, on the spot, a good example.
Do you know how many psychiatrists it takes to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. Oh, it's so hard. Okay, so another example of a change that you made. Anybody have an example of a change you made that worked out well for you? Could be business, couldn't have to be some life-altering thing, but a change that you made. Maybe that was difficult or that had an impact on your business or your life. When we say we like change, usually we would like someone else to change. That's usually what we mean.
Okay,
yes.
This is probably kind of different, but I stopped smoking 6 years ago. So
how come?
For my health reasons, for my husband, for myself, and I see myself so much differently, and I see. I don't know, just the time that I would take to go out and sneak a cigarette from my kids, you know, and I feel like I'm such a better person now that I had to do all these steps to hide what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it took me so long to finally realize, you know, especially for my health.
How long did you smoke before you quit?
Off and on for 20 years. I didn't smoke through my pregnancies.
Round of applause. Give her a round of applause. Way to go. So there's something I like to say all the time, that we change for one of two reasons: inspiration or desperation. Usually it's desperation. The doctor says you need to quit smoking or you're going to live less, or your clothes smelly, your fingers smelly, you feel like you're, out there, sneaking a spoke. So there's generally things in our life that are driven by desperation. Something's broken. We usually don't find God or have a religious experience or change because we're inspired. Sometimes we do, but that's usually not the reason. Think about most of the things in your life you've changed because something was broken or it hurt or you just couldn't take it anymore. So that's why I love this quote. Anybody know what this sequence of letters represents? This is a pattern. These letters are in a sequence based on a pattern. What do you think the pattern is? So you're looking at these letters as letters, and you're trying to figure out what does this sequence of letters mean? What if you looked at these letters differently? What if you looked at them through a new lens? What if these letters represented something else? Like the first letter of the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. See? 10. So when you look at something, you could look at that for half an hour and not get it. First time I saw it, I just stared at it until you know. But it's interesting. Once you know, it's so clear. So here's why, and we're getting to the end of the abstract or theoretical part, but here's why inspiration matters so much. Because there's a very practical reason to be in the inspiration business. We're trying to influence hearts and minds so that people are more predisposed to buying, to selling. You're trying to create a set of conditions for people to be intellectually, emotionally, physiologically dialed in to connect and learn and to be in the company of somebody else. Think how hard it is to do that, to create conditions. Have you ever hosted a party at your house and sometimes it's awesome and there's just like a vibe and everybody clicks, and other times you go to parties and it's like a husband and wife must be fighting because there's a negative vibe going on here, and you just know it's like a negative feeling, right? So you're in the business of creating that positive energy for 1,000 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 30,000 people. It's hard to do that, but that's really what you do. You create conditions for inspiration to occur so that somebody can buy, sell, learn, connect, grow, get a job, find it, whatever that. So just think about that idea and see if it has legs tomorrow morning, a week from now, 2 weeks from now. It may be something that just evaporates and sounds like an abstract idea, but you may find it actually has an influence on your business. So here's the first thing that I believe will help you in your business. Number one, your audience hires the event or the trade show you do to do a job. You hire shoes to do a job, to protect your feet. You hire toothpaste to do a job, to clean your teeth and freshen your breath. What's the number one job you would say your audience hires your event, conference, trade show, to do? If you had to say one thing, and I'm not talking about the exhibitors now, I'm talking about the people, what I would call sort of the core audience. Raise your hand if it's education, professional development and education. Okay, so that's half of you. What's another job, the number one job that they hire your event to do? Build relationships, community, connection. Raise your hand if that's it. That's the number one job, education second. Is there a third reason? What's that? Motivation. I just need to get renewed and refreshed. We do a lot of work with medical organizations, and doctors are burned out and they're tired and they just want to get renewed. They want to be in the company of other doctors. They want to sort of rejuvenate. So renewal and rejuvenation, motivation, that's often one they don't tell you they want, but it's one of the reasons they actually make the decision to go to your event. Okay, so they hire the event to do a job. The key point I'd like to make is that we're at an inflection point. This is a very important time in our lives because most events follow a path of what we call better sameness. Better sameness is a little bit better every single year. It's the same basic model. Maybe a new coat of paint, maybe a little different configuration of the show floor, maybe the marketing's a little different, but it's basically built on the same model. And the world around us has changed, I'm telling you things you know, so much. Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, said that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So think about the rate of change on the outside. Technology, demographics, consolidation, globalization, the role of government influencing our business. There's a lot of change, and yet most of our events are changing just ever so slightly every single year. And that's great until it isn't. Eventually, it catches up to you. And so the idea is, how do you get on the front end of that curve so that you're planning for the next 5 years? Not next year, but the next 5 years. How do you start to make the changes and test? And like Richard said in the beginning, use data to inform your decisions, but also use your imagination. Best practice, secret shop, go to events outside of your own industry, like this event today, and use that as a blasting cap to both get inspired and maybe feel a little desperate, like, wow, we are 5 years behind on X, Y, or Z. So better sameness is a big deal. And most conventions are very conventional. Anybody that reads ASAE Now magazine, we ran running an advertising campaign around better sameness. And those first 3 glasses represent the some of them the 1987 event, the 1996 event, the 2014 event. You know, there's sort of like a little different garnish every year. And how do you break the mold and change how you think about your event so it's not following a path of better sameness? Better sameness is safe. It's safe, but you know what happens when you play it safe and the rest of the world is taking risks and chances? Anybody know what happened to the beloved 146-year-old Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus? Goodbye. 146 years. Like, how did that happen? How did one of the most iconic American experiences go out of business? Better sameness. It really didn't evolve very much over the last 146 years. And Cirque comes out of nowhere. Cirque is going to perform in 130 countries this year. Anybody been to a Cirque du Soleil performance, right? Like, it's pretty awesome. And it's a circus, but it's nothing like Ringling Brothers. So they didn't try to do the Red Apple or Big Apple. What's the name of that circus that competed with Ringling, Big Apple or somebody? That was like a little bit better version of Ringling Brothers. Cirque blew it up. So I would challenge you to think about what is the Cirque du Soleil example for you, okay? Number 2, the 6 R's. I would tell you these are the 6 R's that you are focused on, and sometimes you think about these consciously, but are you reaching the right audience? Are you retaining the core audience? Is your event relevant? Are you building your reputation? Does it generate revenue? Who said that great quote that nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model? That's awesome. I sat there and I wrote a blog about it. Anybody that reads my blog, 3 weeks from now, you're going to be getting a blog. I'll give you credit. That is so smart. You have to make a profit. You have to produce a return on investment. So we encourage everybody we work with to think about these 6 R's. Who uses Net Promoter Score to measure relevance and reputation? Relevance and reputation, Net Promoter Score. Who wants to share what it is? Do you want to tell people what it is?
I actually don't manage it. So
okay.
Probably best I don't.
So Net Promoter Score is a simple question. If I had one question to ask in my survey, it would be, how likely are you to recommend this event to a friend or colleague? 1 to 10. 9 or 10 means, yay, you're coming back. 1 through 6, no, they're detractors. If you're a 1 through 6, that's a negative, and if you're 7 and 8, they throw it out. So you take the 9s and 10s, subtract the 1 through 6s, and you get a Net Promoter Score. It's the most predictive measure of relevance and reputation, period, end of story. And I would encourage you to at least consider it. You can go to netpromoterscore.com. It tells you exactly how to do it, but I just told you how to do it. Okay? So it's a great way to ask your exhibitors and your audience if they're coming back. So it is a great measure of retention. Any questions on this? Anybody use a dashboard like this to come up with metrics that you're kind of evaluating each of these? How do you know if your event's relevant? How do you know if it's relevant to not just your core audience, but the next generation of people you want? Do you know? How do you know? Anybody have an example? Anybody? Come on. Yes, sir. Get that man a microphone, please. Okay. How do you know?
Well, we ask, one of our survey questions is, were you actually able to implement something at work that you learned at the conference?
Yeah. That's a great question. Because if you leave here today or leave here tomorrow and there's nothing that you can go back and apply, maybe it's conceptual, maybe it's practical, maybe it's something you heard on the panel, maybe it's something from this hour, then the question is really, what's the point? Why invest 3 days if we can't go back and do something differently than we did before we came? So that's a great example. So the 6 R's, and most of us, I said inspiration, desperation, most of us change because we feel the heat, not because we see the light. What's an example of where you have seen the light? Like, oh my gosh, we're not getting millennials. Oh my gosh, our core tried and true exhibitors aren't coming back, or they're shrinking their footprint. Yes?
For me, it's exhibiting at other industry shows and wearing that exhibitor cap and understanding a little bit more about what they are going through. You know, I'm only doing three shows a year, and they're doing 20 to 50 shows a year. And now I know why they wait the last week to look at my emails and to call me, you know. So now I feel a little bit more compassion for them because I know what they're going through.
Yeah, great example. Empathy. What's another example of where you either see the light and have made a change for your, I'm talking about for work, your event, or where you felt the heat? Now's the time to share. Come on. Something that hurt. Something like, I can't do this anymore. Or something that you tried and really worked, where you saw the light. You're my go-to person. If I had an MVP award, you'd be getting it right now.
Sorry, I came to participate, so
Good,
I am. I was feeling the pain of exhibitor education, or lack thereof, so I pushed and pushed and pushed, and now I finally have an exhibitor education program that's being implemented at one of my 6 shows. So I'm very excited about that. But it was very painful.
Yeah.
Over and over again, having to educate exhibitors on information and subject matters they should know.
Gotcha. Thank you. How many of you view your primary customer as the exhibitor? And how many of you view the primary customer as the audience that's coming to meet with that exhibitor? Raise your hand if it's the exhibitor. The exhibitor is your primary audience. I don't know, 6 or 7. The rest of you, raise your hand, is the core audience, the engineers, the doctors, whoever. Raise your hand. What about the rest of you? Who's both? Okay, raise your hand if it's both. All right, okay. So you work sort of the buy side and the sell side, so that's terrific. So here's the question that I would ask. What is the pain, like you may not want to reveal it here, but what's the pain or the heat that you're feeling right now about your event? And what's the one thing that you see as the light or the opportunity that you can go back and use as a catalyst? You're not going to make any change about any aspect of your job or your life unless you feel some heat, I've got to do something, or you see some light, you're inspired. No change ever happens in any aspect of our life unless there's a catalyst or blasting cap that activates your pain or your pleasure, if you will, seeking pleasure. Okay, number 3, always start with the audience. And I always say this question, what if you could x-ray your audience? What if you could run them through an x-ray machine? And this is going to be a little jargony, I'm going to say it anyway, but just indulge me. There are really 6 ways that you can segment an audience. Because really an event is about creating segmented both marketing, product development, and delivery, right? You're trying to customize your event in a large mass environment. You can segment by demographics, which those are observable characteristics. Geographics, most events are semi-regional events anyway. You know, a big part of the audience comes from 300 miles. Firmographics, what's the SIC code of the organization coming? Attitudes and psychographic profiles. Behavioral and economic. Those are the 6 filters that you can use to segment your audience. I want to give you an example of an organization. Anybody familiar with the Direct Marketing Association? Raise your hand if you know who they are. Okay, so they've had an event for 98 years. This is their 100th anniversary this year. And the challenge they faced was the direct marketing industry has really moved beyond them. The envelope manufacturers, the printers, the insertion order people, all of the companies that supported the Sears catalog and the Montgomery Ward's catalog and all the direct mail of the past are still at their show because there's nowhere else to go. But guess who today's direct marketers are? There's 2. It's actually a duopoly. There are two primary marketers today that are running the world. Facebook is one. Snapchat's on the way. Amazon is on the way. Google. Google's the largest direct marketing advertising agency on the planet. 33% of all digital marketing is owned, market share, by Google. Facebook's number 2, and they've got about 17%. That's a duopoly. They really are running the direct marketing universe. And the problem with the Direct Marketing Association is they've got these manufacturers that sell envelopes and printing presses, and Google and Facebook and Snapchat and Amazon and on and on and on aren't coming. Okay, so think about that quandary. So they rebranded. This is their old name, the Global Event for Data-Driven Marketers. This is their new name. And then, like, how weird is that? It's like, what? Yeah, and then. What is and then? It's the name of our event. What does it mean? Good question. Let me tell you what it means. It gives them a chance to describe what it means. And they had to tell people it was a DMA event because it was so out there. All these manufacturers of envelopes and printing presses were like, where's the DMA event? So they had to sort of figure out how to do that. So here's the big news. They were able to attract 68% of an audience that had never attended a DMA event and were not members of the DMA in 1 year. Wow. So it was a sort of a 3-part process. All the exhibitors were interviewed and said, what would you be willing to do to get a new audience? And they shared their feedback. And then they interviewed Google and Facebook and Snapchat and Amazon. They said, what would it take to get you there? And they redesigned the entire trade show floor around what they heard. And they did this in 9 months. There was a center media hub programming the entire day, commercials, the whole bit. There was a ring of exhibit booths around the outside. And then there were a series of conversation pods like this. So they reinvented the trade show floor. But they started with the audience. They x-rayed their audience. And they said, who do we want to come to our event? And they found that there were 5 segments of the audience that represented about 80% of all the marketers out there. They did some research and they found out that there were some really major distinctions in these 5 people, and these people represented the majority of who they wanted to get. And Sarah is an ambitious seeker. What Sarah's looking for is education, and she's there to learn. Remember I said, what's the number one thing? The thing is, every one of your attendees has more than just one thing. You've got one thing, and you've got a different one thing, and you've got a different one thing. So for her, this was her one thing. Give me education, that's all I want. I'll go to the trade show if I can learn something there. And I'll talk to people at a reception if I can learn something. But she filters everything through this lens of, am I going to learn? Am I going to take away something so I can go back and be better at my job? Now, she's very different than this guy. Marcus is like the fraternity rush chairman. He goes to meet and greet and get clients and recruit people to work for his agency. He's like the man. And he doesn't care about education. He's there to build business. That's why he goes. And so each one of those profiles had a different reason. So you have to build an event for Marcus. You've got to build an event for Sarah. And for these other people that guy with the glasses, bald guy, he's sort of the CEO, the big shot. And he doesn't want to do much networking because he's trying to stay away, as you know, from the exhibit floor. He's not going to learn anything because he's been there, done that. He goes to find out what his competitors are doing. That's what he wants. And he only wants to spend about a half a day, right? And so we had to build something. They had to build something that was unique to that guy. So they all had their own individual needs. And so one of the things they had to do was change the perception that the DMA was this stodgy envelope manufacturer printing press association. So they created a whole campaign where they created products. They just made up products. There's no such window cleaner that is for clear creative direction, right? This is sort of a weird, like Axe meets Old Spice guy. You know, it soothes the irritated strategist. So this was the most effective social campaign they've ever done. I love this one. Causes pain produced by tight deadlines. Now, you might not like this next one, but it was actually the best performing one of all. Cures marketing dysfunction. I'm just saying, you know, it worked. They had somebody driving around Boston where the event was, and they bought 200 dozen donuts and handed them out from the truck, this truck that they created, and delivered it to advertising agencies. They delivered 200 dozen donuts to 200 advertising agencies that had probably, I don't know, 8,000 people who worked in those agencies, many of whom came to the event. They did this 3 days before the event. Like, hey, I didn't know there was an event in town. Well, of course you didn't, because you would never come to a DMA event. You'd never open a DMA email. And here's a dozen donuts that were all decorated in the color of the brand. This truck drove around. They had only had one keynote speaker in the past, one keynote. They didn't have a very big budget, but they made a decision that they had to change the perception. So they got the chief marketing officer of IBM to speak and launch their new advertising campaign. They got John Legend to come. And not only is he just a great businessman, but he sang a song on stage, which sort of was kind of awesome. Blake Mycoskie, who founded Tom's Shoes, was there. So they created a whole, and they spent a lot of money on this. But they had to, because they needed a blasting cap, because better sameness wasn't going to work. Better sameness was not going to work. Now, you're probably not there yet. You are probably not in this position. So you might think, okay, how would I do something like this over the next 5 years? Test something in 17, go a little bigger in 18, maybe go a little bigger in 19, and really create a glide path to something that allows you to change and reinvent your event in a way that is awesome. Now, this may be way outside. Can anybody imagine doing something? I mean, anybody imagine changing your entire event in 9 months? I'm going to see 0 hands, I predict, on this one. They did this in 9 months. You know why?
They had to.
They had to, right? If the doctor says you got about a year left if you don't quit smoking, it doesn't take you too long to quit smoking. You're like, okay, you stop right then. So none of you are in this position, but don't let yourself get anywhere close to the neighborhood of being in this position. And the best way to do this, we competitive shop events primarily in Europe and Asia, and they're doing some of the most amazing things, probably 10 years from what we're going to be able to do here. But they're doing many things that you can bring back and apply to your industry. And so that's the Direct Marketing Association. So here's another example. These are the 10 hurdles that you must clear to get people to come to your event. Have I heard of the event? Am I aware of the event? Now, we assume that everybody knows about our events. Guess what? Not so. The majority of the people in your industry probably don't know, and I mean this, probably don't know when your event is, who's going to be there, or maybe that you even have an event. We assume they do because we've got a database. We mail them. We send direct mail. We do social media to capture their attention. It's amazing what percentage of the audience actually doesn't know you're having an event. Mind-blowing. And you probably don't believe that because you're sure that everybody in my industry knows we're having this event. But take my word for it. The next thing is, do they care about it? And they care about it. Remember, Marcus cares about it differently than Sarah does. You know, it's got to be relevant to something they care about. Is it better than the alternatives? What's an alternative to going to your conference or your trade show? What's one? There's about 10. What's one? Somebody else's. Yeah, that's a start. What's another alternative?
Stay at work.
Pardon me?
Not leaving work.
Yeah, stay home. Don't go at all because I can, you know, either download it afterwards. What's another alternative?
Get information online.
Yeah, get it online. It's faster, it's better, it's cheaper. I can just, you know, have access to it. What's another alternative to not going?
Watch it live.
Yeah, watch it live, or just a lot of alternatives. But the biggest alternative is I'll just stay home. And I either don't need the information or I'll get it some other way. When is it? Who's going to be there is a big deal. I know a lot of you do this, but one of the great events that I love to study is Money 2020. Anybody heard of Money 2020? Okay, check it out. So we work with a lot of financial service companies, bankers and mortgage bankers and all these companies or associations in the financial services. Money 2020 is an event started 5 years ago. 2 guys from Google didn't know anything about events. I mean, zero. They got $2 million in investment capital, venture funded. They created an event called Money 2020. 5 years later, last year, they sold it, you ready, for $100 million. $2 million investment, $100 million return, went from 0 to 10,000 people, put on by two guys who didn't know anything about events, conferences, or trade shows. I went to it. It wasn't that different than anything else I've ever been to. It was a trade show and receptions and all the normal stuff, but they brought together a different audience. And then they created an event to compete with the National Retail Federation called Shop Talk. And Shop Talk now has 7,000 people in 3 years from scratch. They've got Shop Talk Copenhagen, Shop Talk Singapore. They've got events all over the place. They just launched one this week in the healthcare space. So who's the company that's going to come and create an event that's going to suck the oxygen out of the room in your industry? I don't know who it is, but you know, this idea of being better than the alternative, it's hard to be better than them. And the first thing they do is they tell you who's going to be there. The reason people go to these events is because they publish every single person who's going to attend. You agree to that. Every single vendor, every single supplier, every single sponsor, every single underwriter. And you're like, oh, those are the people I want to hang with. And before they even launch the event, they've got 300 or 400 people that are already going. So the first email goes out and said, here's all the people that are coming. Like, how'd they do that? Good question, topic for another day. Where is it? Can I afford it? Will my boss approve it? And is there an X factor? Who has an X factor for their event? Like that thing that just makes you want to go. Like, I'm going to convince my boss that I got to go to this because of what? What do you have or in the last couple of years? Something that makes your event indispensable and irresistible. Certification. It's sort of like you got to be there. Okay, good. What's another one? What's something that's aspirational? Yes?
We tend to have a big reveal at one of our big conferences. So one year it was our brand revitalization, and everyone wanted to see what the new logo was going to look like. So we typically try to have some sort of reveal or a big national initiative or something like that. And people feel like, oh, I'm sorry. It's a big reveal moment that we try to incorporate into our largest conference. So people feel like they have to be there to be the first to hear what the new strategic initiative is going to be. Or in one year, it was a complete brand revitalization, and everyone was excited to see the new logo, our new look and feel, and all of that. So
that's a great example. I always tell people that marketing is a seduction. What is seductive? That may seem weird to you, but what is seductive about your event? You're saying, do you know my industry? Do you know what I do? Do you know the exhibitors that exhibit on our show floor? Do you know the people that come to our event? Guess what? They're just like you, they're just like me, and they want to be lured, they want to be inspired, and thinking about how you seduce them with some kind of X factor. For the DMA, it was John Legend, and we had the Goo Goo Dolls perform a concert. Those were the two reasons that I bet you half the people came. Goo Goo Doll concert, John Legend. It was the X factor. Did they get a return on their investment? Yep. Probably a third of the people came for those two reasons alone. Yes? Okay. She needs to ask a question.
Because that's sexy. To have a John Legend, to have a Goo Goo Dolls, that's awesome, that's cool. But I'm not going to go for them.
Right.
It's great that they're there.
I mean, you personally.
No, I'm not going to spend the $3,000 with the hotel and the registration and everything to go to see they're wonderful. But is that really making people come to the meeting?
Two things I want to say. Thank you. I'm glad you said that. There's two things I'll point out. One is, you will not go, but you might. And you might, camera guy, you might go, or you might go. So we always look at things through our own lens. I'd never do that, but guess what? You might and you might. That's number one. Yeah, but you got to clear all those other hurdles. It's got to be in the right place. The people have to be there. It has to be relevant. I have to care. This is the icing on top. Nobody's going to go for that reason, but it tips the scale. It's like, you know, it's that better than alternatives. You got to get all of these boxes checked. So you're exactly right. You can't just do that because that's fluffy and doesn't make any sense. So you got to clear those hurdles. That's why it's at the top of the pyramid. So I'm glad you said that. Okay. Number 5. Hang with me for a second on this. This is really practical. It may sound academic, but it's not. I believe there are 4 dimensions to an event. The physical dimension, this is the physical dimension right here. The physiological, how do I feel? Am I eating salt, sugar, fat, carbs, alcohol? Do I get enough sleep? Is my pillow comfortable? You know, all those things. Usually people leave your event, they're like toast. They're exhausted and they need a day off. And It's hard to be engaging and charming and learn and connect and work a trade show booth and all this when you're, not at your best. Now, I'm not saying you can't have fun, you can't have alcohol, you can't have, sugar, fat, salt, carbs, coffee, all that cool stuff. I love it. I eat it all the time. But physiological matters, emotional, we're never going to buy or sell from each other unless there's that connection. Remember the beginning they talked about the handshake with the dirt? That's really what it's about. There's got to be an emotional connection because otherwise I'll stay home. Live, face-to-face human interaction, 3 feet away from each other. Maslow's hierarchy. Anybody remember that from sociology way back when? Remember the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy? The third tier? It's survival, having your basic needs met, and then there's belonging. It's the third rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Human beings have a fundamental need to belong and be connected. It's a tribal thing. It's in our DNA, and we have to be, even if we're the most introverted person on the planet, we still want to be in the company of other people when we want to be in the company of other people. And if you can create an emotional energy, a frequency, where people feel emotionally connected, man, they're going to learn and they're going to buy. If you can create a physical environment that creates a set of conditions, this is a great physical environment. You're comfortable, it looks cool, it's different. You can talk to the person next to you. I can walk around. It's a great physical environment. There's food nonstop. You can graze all day long. Right? And so you learn better when you're emotionally connected. So here's an example of a physical environment. The American Institute of Architects, for the last 5 years, have been working to move outside of the mind-numbing, soul-sucking, cavernous cement block called convention centers into a campus. So 5 years ago, they knew they were going to LA, and they said, you know what? LA is awesome. There's amazing architecture there. What if we used LA as our campus? So they've mapped out the footprint. Most of this you can get to on a bike. You can walk. You can use a Segway. There's little shuttles. You might have to grab an Uber to go to some of the outer reaches. But you can pretty much walk to everything in the campus. And every speck of this campus is an economic engine. There's exhibitors, there's sponsors, there's education, there's learning, there's connections. So this is not some flaky idea. Every single aspect of this campus is built from the ground up. That's number one. That's the physical dimension. The idea to take Staples Center and convert it into an auditorium that they can use. The idea of creating zones outside, because it's going to be in the time of the year when you can be outside in LA. Coming in and branding, wrapping everything, wall washing and branding the heck out of the environment, creating this is a rendering, they haven't done this yet, but they think they can pull it off, and really going vertical. I've been to C2 many, many times. What C2 does a great job of is that it's a vertical event. Everything is vertical. It's not a flat event. People hanging from the ceilings, the ball pit. There's a thing where you walk around and you and I get in line and we get umbrellas and we put on a yellow slicker and we walk through an indoor snowstorm and we just talk. And we walk up and down these hills and we've never met each other. And we're like, this is the weirdest thing. So you're talking about this weird thing you're doing together with a stranger. And in a couple of minutes, we bonded. We're not strangers anymore. And they do this. They take the event and they lift it up. And I think that's something that we can all do. And it doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. So this is, and the Angie's List, is she still here? Nope. Yep. You know, I mean, the idea of having really tall vertical booths works, I mean, because of the sight lines. But this is an idea that you can use for education and professional development. Another example of how you can brand a public space. So these are renderings. We did these renderings 5 years ago. That's how long it takes to get this stuff done. How am I doing so far? Are you tracking with this? I'm going to do a lightning round soon. So I'm going to come to 10 of you, and you're going to share the one idea, insight, or observation, or the thing you disagree with, or think is ridiculous, or want to challenge. So you don't have to be polite. They do an on-site. Many of you probably do this, a live media. They do Architect Live. It's an interactive, sponsorable component. Physiologically, when they were in Philadelphia, they opened up Reading. What do they call that? Reading Station? Reading Terminal. And they basically, that was their private food court. Lots of beanbag chairs, lots of comfortable spaces. Lots of intimate places to connect. Same tables as we have here. Look at that. You're exactly right. So the emotional. Now, I agree that it's really hard to get a great keynote speaker. Now, you're looking at this. This was the former First Lady's first public speech. I have seen, I bet, 1,000 keynotes in my life. I do this for a living. I go to events for a living. I have never in my life seen a keynote speaker who had the audience eating out of her hand. She said, you know, Barack wanted to be an architect. Architects are insecure people. Anybody married to one or know an architect? They learn by critique and criticism. They've got a chip on their shoulder. I love architects, but they're kind of a gnarly group. They cross their arms a lot and stare at you, and they wear black clothes, and they're like, cerebral and intense and stuff. When she said that Barack wanted to be, you may not like Barack Obama, but that audience was melting right before their very eyes when she talked about him wanting to be an architect. And so she is a great example. She's expensive, but she's a great example of somebody who really, I think, created an emotional energy. They got 10 times what they paid for her, 10 times back in the emotional frequency they created. She may not be right for you. You might have a $10,000 keynote speaker. I agree. Keynote speakers, it's a terrible idea. Keynote, who wants to listen to somebody, blah, blah, blah? The only reason this is remotely interesting to you is because I'm talking to you and I'm connecting, I'm engaging, and you're talking back, and that's what you need, unless you're John Legend or Michelle Obama. And who's got that kind of money? So, intellectually, here's the last thing I'm going to say on this. Creating journey maps. Who does journey maps? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, a few of you. 4, 5. So a journey map is looking at the profile of the audience. This is the small firm practitioner. 80% of the people that go to this convention have less than 15 architects working for them. So you unpack the event, you create a journey map, and you say, listen, Mr. First-time attendee who's never been to our event, who's a small firm practitioner, here's the 9 things you need to do. We've designed these exactly for you. Go to this place on the exhibit floor. Go to this education session. Go to this learning lounge. And they create aspects of the event. You sell these aspects in advance to demonstrate you have something for them. And then you journey map it when you get there. And you put them out in paper. You put it on the app. You make them available. Put them in the program guide. However you communicate to your on-site audience. It really, really works to land the plane. And Richard was talking earlier about having smaller conferences some for you and some for you and some for you. That's what this does. It takes the big thing and makes it intimate and curates it. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. Here's one thing I'll tell you. This really works. This is an organization that's, for the last 6 years, been working on these things. They improved their sponsorship and exhibit revenue. You should call the CEO and ask him. He'll tell you. It's increased their revenue because they were doing $10,000 and $15,000 sponsorships. Now they're doing $250,000 sponsorships by reinventing their event. And they've increased the top line of their association 3x. So the meeting professionals who work there are doing great things to get the organization dialed up. So we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. So let me ask you, what's the one thing, the aha, the insight, the key takeaway that you've extracted from this? If I can do a little mic running, you don't get to pick. I'm going to come to you right here, who's not making eye contact with me. What's the one thing you took out of the last 45 minutes?
To let go of the better sameness. I've been building on something that somebody else created, and I've just been trying to improve it a little at a time. And who knows if they even knew what they were doing in the first place. So why not just take this opportunity to start from scratch and get really creative and then build from there.
We all inherited events from somebody else. Like literally somebody in the 1950s probably started half of the events we work on. No harm, no foul, but it's 2018, right? So that's a great insight. Somebody, let's see, right here. You look like you've got something to say. What's the one thing, aha, insight, or takeaway?
I knew you were going to come to me.
Looking away is the best way to get me to come to you. Sorry. Just something that resonated with you. It doesn't have to be profound.
Honestly, it was the Google and the Facebook comments about them being the direct marketers in our society, and that everything after them is for nothing. Really, yeah. I mean that's
how the world
has
resonated.
Changed. Yeah, 7
years. It's been 7 years for them to be the two dominant players, and they're consuming so much of the market share from the traditional advertising agencies.
Right.
Excellent. Lightning round from you. You look like you've got something you're dying to say. Bring it to this man right here.
I guess it's just the slide that said looking at things differently. The things you look at are different, or change. I think is what. Kind of getting out of your comfort zone, looking at it differently.
Yeah, looking the way, when you look at something differently, it starts to change just by the fact of how you're looking at it. That's a good observation. How about right there?
That I'm looking through a telescope instead of a microscope.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
Let's take it back to the gentleman looking very scholarly with the glasses right there. I forget his name. Okay.
That's Norm. Look for inspiration. Wherever your source is, you say, versus feel the heat, see the light, is just look for those opportunities for light.
Where do you go for inspiration? Do you go outside? Do you take walks? Do you go to movies? Do you hang with your kids? Do you walk your dog? You pet your cat? You go to a restaurant? Like, where do you go for inspiration? And that's really where a lot of things that if you let the environment that you love and turns you on, open your mind, you find things that you can bring back home to your job. So that's a great observation. How about right there? Right there. Hi. Hi.
Hi, Marie.
Thank you, Richard. We changed for either desperation or inspiration.
Yes.
So I like that.
Yeah, inspiration is more fun and it's less expensive. Trust me. How about you, young lady right there? You have a book open. I hope you're not reading your favorite novel that you're taking notes. I know you are. I'm kidding.
Mine would probably be when you talked about owning the business that we're in. So the value that comes with my position and knowing how I can cause change in a way that not only affects me and my company, but others as well.
Thank you. There's this, I talked about an insecurity complex. Many of you may not find this, but I find so many people in the meetings profession we talk about not having a seat at the table and, you're sort of isolated oftentimes. But you have one of the most important jobs in your entire organization, building your brand, building the relevance, building the reputation, generating revenue, producing an ROI, attracting an audience. I mean, is there anything more important? Why doesn't every CEO and every board want to hear what you think about how to reinvent, reimagine, and make what you're doing stronger? It's the most powerful marketing channel there is. Word of mouth is the most powerful marketing channel. Period, end of story. And what you do is word of mouth marketing and direct sales. How about in the back? Yes. That's what you get for talking to me earlier.
I would say the journal maps, which...
Journey map?
Yeah, journey map. In our world, we would call it tracks.
It's like breadcrumbs. It's really just laying out a set of breadcrumbs for somebody to follow. Because if you unpack the inventory, 700 exhibit booths, 300 learning sessions, countless hours of receptions. Think about all the inventory that your event has. Most people can consume 24 hours, maybe over a few days of inventory, and you've got 600-700 hours of inventory. Have you ever thought about it like that? You do. You've got a lot of inventory that somebody could consume, and they've got this much time. So by creating that journey map, you really allow them to consume the inventory on their terms. I'm going to have a cigarette in just a minute after this seduction. Okay, so let's see right there. You look like you are dying to say something. Yes?
Gene.
I could just say, yes, the same thing difference between looking in the microscope and the telescope.
Good, thank you.
That was good.
Okay, one more. Raise your hand if you've got something you just want to share that you can hardly stand. Yes, you have been so quiet. I couldn't tell whether you were tracking it all. You look very serious, but now you're going to lay it on me.
I wanted to challenge you earlier when you talked about the Ringling Brothers. What happens to their competitors down the line that are doing the same thing they were doing, but they got caught? They went out of business. What happens to the next guy? What does that do to them to evolve? Do they have change, or do they give up, or do they stay the same?
You know about other circuses?
Right.
Well, the circuses that compete with Ringling Brothers were a lot of like regional or semi-regional events, and there's sort of two dynamics. One is, the technology has sort of overpowered the family unit, and people don't go to the circus as much. They had the animal rights issue, and they were very expensive. So there aren't many local circuses left. I don't know of any, but there may be some, but I don't know of any downstream circuses that are still in business.
But take the example of how that company went out of business compared to another industry. I'm in the wire industry. I have a die company, and there were 15 die companies in competition. One doesn't follow the outer to the inner, percentage-wise, and making an evolving change? How does that influence the competitors?
That's a great question. I'm going to talk to you afterwards because I don't know the answer, but I'm sure there is a good answer. So let's do this. Quick recap. These were the 5 things that I said that I believe if you can take a nugget from each one of those 5, in addition to the one thing that will have the greatest impact on your business. If you want to subscribe to the blog or you want any information, would love to hear from you. It's been awesome. See you tonight at the party. And I can't wait to hear our next speaker who seems like an awesome guy. So thank you very much. Peace.